What's going on, guys? Aldrin Anastasio here with FlytPath.com. Now, with the new release of the DJI Mini 3 Pro, I'm really happy that they changed up the camera system when it comes to adding and removing filters. On the previous Mini and the Mini SE and the Mini 2 Pro, the camera system on there wasn't really designed, or wasn't really a user-friendly design for you to add on filters. Filter companies would have to make this little hook system that would hook onto the actual top vents of the camera, and then the lens would just sit right on top. Now, I have a ton of videos on my channel about how to use filters, whether we're using it for video or photos. I'll leave that full playlist down below in the video description if you want a lot more information about filters and drones. In this video, let's quickly talk about what DJI has to offer, which is this 3-pack. In a way, I kind of call it like a sampler pack, but I did reach out to a couple of other companies, Freewell Gear, Polar Pro, and a few other ones are coming out with their filter sets, so we'll talk about that as well. Also, we'll quickly talk about what ND filters do, and also how to install them on the Mini 3 Pro. Now, first and foremost, what are ND filters, and do you even need them if you're picking up the DJI Mini 3 Pro? In short, ND filters, or neutral density filters, are what you might think as sunglasses for your camera. Now, why is that even necessary, or why is it such a big deal? Well, if you don't have anything on your camera, the way the DJI Mini 3 comes, it does not come with any filters. It just comes with this little ring around the edge, but there's actually no filter on it. Now, the one thing on the Mini 3 Pro is that we do have a fixed 1.7 aperture, so you're not able to close that aperture down like you are on some other models like the MAVIC 3, MAVIC 2 Pro, where you're able to adjust that aperture, which means when it comes to exposure, you're really only able to adjust two other factors. You're able to adjust the ISO, or the sensitivity to the sensor, or the shutter speed. So if you're shooting on a very bright day, you're gonna have to crank that shutter speed up really high in order for you to properly expose your image. Because with that high shutter speed, whether it's 1/500, 1/1000, 1/2000 of a shutter speed, everything in that video is going to be very sharp and very in focus. Now, most people will say, well, isn't that the point? Wouldn't you want everything sharp and in focus? It's true to an extent, but when you're shooting video and you want to create natural motion blur in your video, you're not going to want to have really, really high shutter speeds, because you're not going to be able to get that natural movement in the video. You're going to want to slow the shutter speed down so you actually introduce a little bit of motion blur in the video. Now, for a quick example, what that really means, now here's a quick little tire test showing you side by side what is actually happening. And if I spin the tire, as you can see here, the tire looks pretty normal, looks like it's spinning as it would be, and looks pretty straightforward. But if you were to slow that shutter speed down now by putting on an ND filter, bringing that shutter speed down to about 1/60th of a second, as you can see here on the right hand side, there's a little bit of motion blur in it, so it looks a little less sharp, a little less jittery in the videos when you look at them side by side. So that's what the ND filters are actually doing. Because you're not able to change your aperture, you have different strengths of ND, or neutral density filters, that you're going to be putting onto the front of your camera. Now, with the different strengths, it makes you have to adjust your shutter speed to properly expose your image. Now, one rule of thumb or reference a lot of people like to do is double your frame rate. So if you are shooting, for instance, I'm shooting at 4K 30 frames a second. Ideally, what you want to do is bring your shutter speed down to about 1/60th, or double your frame rate. Now, the one thing that's hard is that when you are flying up there, you're turning the camera around, you're turning the drone around. So dialing it in every single time at 2 times your frame rate isn't probably realistic. But I think overall, having ND filters and having the ability to slow that shutter speed down to add in some natural motion blur is what you really want to do. Even if you're just shooting in auto and it's a really bright day, throwing on something like an ND16, ND32 will then automatically lower that shutter speed. The camera will automatically lower the shutter speed to adjust for exposure. As a quick reference, here's a couple more shots of just flying outside on the street. Now, if you're shooting way up in the air, 100, 200, 300 feet up in the air, ND filters won't be as noticeable, or the use of them won't be as noticeable when you're up that high. That motion blur is gonna be a lot more noticeable. It gives you the perception of speed. You have that motion coming at the camera, and that slower shutter speed adds that little blur to the images and to the objects that are passing through. Now DJI does sell this set right here, which is an ND16, an ND64, and an ND256. This to me, I always call like kind of like a sampler pack, because if you are trying to really dial it in properly, you're gonna want a larger range of ND filters, neutral density filters. Companies like Freewell, Polar Pro, they will normally offer things like an ND4, ND8, ND16, ND32, ND64. So they have a more of a range if you wanna fine tune the exposure on the Mini 3 Pro. These higher ND filters or darker ND filters are really good if you wanna do things like hyperlapse or time lapse, and you want to drag out that exposure, slow it down a little bit so it smooths out those hyperlapses. I also like to use really dark ND filters like ND1000, ND2000 that normally Freewell has. I like to use those for long exposure photography when I'm out there at the beach, at the water. And if it's a really bright day, you're able to still slow that shutter speed down even on very, very bright days if you get darker ND filters. Like I mentioned, I actually have a lot of videos talking about long exposure photography on my channel. I'll leave those links down below. Long exposure photography is probably one of my favorite things to do with the drones. Now, when it comes to installation on the Mini 3 Pro, like I said, a lot easier than the Mini 2 and the Mini lineup. Now on the very front of the camera, all you have to do is hold the camera nice and steady, and then you just have to twist the top. There's a little lens cap right there. All you do is just twist it counterclockwise. It'll then pop right off. And then you just grab whichever ND filter you want to use. And like I mentioned, some of the other kits have different strengths. What you want to do is test out which one works best in order for you to get the proper shutter speed. What I'll normally like to do is, like I said, if I'm shooting at 4K 30 and I want my shutter speed to be 1/60th, I will set it at 1/60th and then pull out different ND strengths to see which one matches and which one gives me the proper exposure. Now to install it, same thing, just put it on there kind of at that angle that it came off at. Once you push it down, twist it back on, and there you go. So much easier compared to the previous Minis. The one thing I didn't like what DJI did, I don't know why they did this, is that the actual factory clear lens or hollow lens basically is thicker than the ND filters that they sell, which means if I put the factory one back in the case, it actually doesn't fit. So I don't know why they did that. I don't know why they just didn't make it the same. That would have been nice, so I can actually throw the factory one back in the case, but no, it doesn't fit. And there it is. Just want to talk to you guys about ND filters, how to use them, what they're for, and also on the Mini 3 Pro, a lot easier installation with this new camera. I have a lot more videos on drones and ND filters. Make sure you guys check out that playlist down below. Of course, if you guys got some value from this video, a big like would be much appreciated. Also, don't forget to subscribe, hit that bell to be notified when I post new videos. If you guys want to see a full list of DJI Mini 3 videos, that will be down below as well. This is also Sasio with FlytPath.com. I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.